I think most people expected the Chicago Bulls to be somewhere around the playoff picture in the East this year. Whether you were optimistic in the possibility of them finishing around or above 500 and securing the 7th or 8th seed, or them finishing on around 35 to 38 wins and finishing in that 8 to 10 range. Now, if you had told me the Bulls were going to finish 11th in the East, I wouldn't have been shocked. But if you told me they were going to finish below the Wizards and Hornets, now that would have been a slight issue and a slight issue for concern. But there's a few reasons why this season, in my opinion, can be seen as a bit of a write-off, a bit of an anomaly, and the main issue and a big reason the Bulls' future suddenly looks a lot brighter is the coaching of Jim Boylen, or the no longer existent coaching of Jim Boylen. We don't need to go too deep into everything Boylen did wrong, but all we need to understand was that he was a clear negative. He was clearly negatively affecting the players. When you have players openly criticizing him, that means they absolutely hated him. Because for you to put your playing time at risk to criticize the man who has control over how much you play shows you must have so little respect for his ability to coach, and it was clear his ability to coach was non-existent. And when your playing group has that little respect for you, it's hard to expect them to overperform or to perform at the level that you would have expected. We don't need to go into depth about Jim Boylen because there has been coverage about his ineptitude from every single Bulls and non-Bulls fan over the course of a year, over the course of his coaching career. So if you want more detail about that, you can find that after you finish watching this video, of course, because we're about to get into why you should be optimistic about the future of Chicago and why going forward, leaving Jim Boylen in the past and moving forward with a group of young, talented players could see them become one of the more promising teams in the NBA. Now, quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like right now, that would be much appreciated. These videos do take a fair bit of time, and a like really helps out how the video does. So if you want to see more content, that's all you have to do. Anyways, let's get back into it. Let's start off with Billy Donovan. You can talk about how he struggled to win in the playoffs with the likes of Westbrook, Kevin Durant, way off P, George Paul, and some pretty star-studded lineups on paper, that is. But it's easy to just say, oh, he had all these players and he didn't win anything or make it out of the first rounds the last 4 years. But he managed to lead the Thunder to the playoffs 5 consecutive seasons with near 600 records in all of them. The only time he had a real title contender was with KD, and we know how that went. And then the other series is the Rockets were a better team in 2017. The 2018 Jazz series was easy to pin the blame on him, but Carmelo Anthony was terrible that series and Westbrook wasn't much better. And the Jazz were a very good team. Like, people didn't give them enough credit for what they were good at doing. And we know what happened against the Blazers. And then this season was probably the most impressive effort, where he took a team that wasn't fancy to make the playoffs to a 600 record and a 7-game first-round series with the Rockets. What we saw this year was probably what we are going to see from Donovan as a Bulls coach. He got Steven Adams involved much more in the passing game, and I'm sure he'll try to utilize Wendell Carter Jr. in that same kind of role, using him as someone that they can have post up and find cutters, who the Bulls have quite a few of. We also might see the use of 3 guards on the floor with the amount of guards the Bulls have in their rotation, and a way of having Kobe, Zach, and one of Sato or Dunn on the floor, granted he resigns, or maybe a potential top draft pick, who knows. Now keep this in mind when thinking about Billy Donovan. He supposedly had quite a few suitors, and it seemed as though he broke up with the Thunder because they were in a rebuilding phase and he was looking to compete. That's what we heard. So he must see this team as a team ready to compete, or at least close to competing. And that's what I expect to see from the Bulls this season, and I think that's what you guys should expect to see. The Bulls have plenty of upside. I was going to point out a couple of players with upside, but when you look up and down their roster, you could see improvement from every one of their starters, and then you keep in mind they have a number 4 overall pick coming in, which we'll talk about in a bit. So despite a terrible 2020 season, there's still a lot of reason to be optimistic. Now let's start with the optimism, and let's start with the guards. Kobe White was one of the best rookies in the class, and his end to the season was genuinely superb for a rookie. And after he saw an increase in minutes and responsibility over the last 15 games of the season, he put up over 20 points per game, just shy of 4 rebounds, and just shy of 4.5 assists per game on increased efficiency over that period of time, which is even more impressive when you consider for a rookie point guard, it is expected the efficiency might be a bit below the mark. Considering White still has some room to develop and thus doesn't have the ability to finish as strong at the rim, he doesn't have the decision-making to always take the right shots. Sometimes his decision-making can be a bit rash in terms of shot selection. So for his efficiency to see notable improvement over the last 15 games with notable increased responsibility, it really bodes well for him going forward. But just to put into perspective how impressive Kobe was in his last 15 games of the season, here are his averages over that time, and here are the averages from Donovan Mitchell's rookie season. Now, I don't need to tell you about the different circumstances and sample size, but that is the kind of level White was performing at prior to the hiatus, and Bulls fans should be very excited with the prospect of Kobe White going forward. There's a chance we see even more improvement from younger players heading into next season because they've had more than enough time to gain weight and pretty much get 2 off seasons in over the course of what would normally be just 1 off season heading into a new season. So the added strength, the added explosiveness, and the added ability to look at film and recognize what he was doing well at the end of the season and what he struggled with at points of the season could help him potentially go to that next level a bit sooner than you would have expected otherwise. Heading into last season, if I had told you Lauri Markkanen would be an All-Star in 2020, I don't think you would have been shocked. This was one of the most promising young players full stop who had a great finish to the season, but some serious regression in year 3 saw him fall off the radar completely and go from someone we had pinned to be a future All-Star potentially as soon as this year to nothing more than a role player, and not a greatly effective one at that, but Lauri can bring it back. It was pretty evident out of all the bad dynamics Jim Boylen had with players, and yeah, he had a few, the one with Lauri was clearly the worst. His numbers damn near halved in terms of how many touches he got, dropping from 70 to 45. And when you aren't getting involved in the offense whatsoever, you're going to lose confidence, you're going to lose rhythm, and that's exactly what happens. But I think we saw enough in year 2 from Lauri to suggest under the right coach, or any coach that's not Jim Boylen, he can become a good second or third option on a very good team. Now, when looking at the front court duo of Lauri and Wendell Carter, we haven't seen great returns when they have shared the court together, but there was significant improvement this year from last year in terms of the net rating with those two on the floor. And considering how disappointing Markkanen was, it suggests there might be room for optimism with Carter a pretty multi-dimensional young center who just hasn't been able to stay healthy, and Lauri a more than capable stretch 4 who can get to the rack and score 20 a night when the offense starts to involve him more often than he was getting involved this season, and when he gets a healthy run of games, which hopefully he gets this year. And then let's look at the star of the Bulls. There's a reason Kevin Durant said that Zach Lavine could be a superstar. I'll take the greatest scorer of all time's word for it, and there's reason to take his word for it aside from him being Kevin Durant. Lavine has improved his game every year in the league, and despite him still being far from the two-way player, like very far from the two-way player that he needs to be to put himself in that Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler, that type of conversation, he's only 25 and has shown he's not only a lights-out scorer, but a developing playmaker and someone that can act as a primary ball handler when needed or can play off ball. Now, I'm not saying he's the perfect primary ball handler, but he's someone that's shown he can do it. Lavine's versatility is important as well, because when you're considering how much improvement they'll look to see from Kobe and how they'll try to see if he can fit at the point guard position, Lavine's ability to share playmaking duties, play off ball, score when needed, do everything offensively that you want next to a younger point guard, just makes it easier for Kobe to transition into someone taking higher usage, into someone trying to develop their playmaking. And despite both of these guys having issues in terms of their playmaking, I think as a pairing it'll help ease the burdens so one of them isn't asked to do so much. But not much else needs to be said about Zach Lavine. He's a near elite scorer who has improved all aspects of his offensive game, but he just needs to get way better defensively if he wants to be the best player on a contending team, and if he wants to put himself in the same category, and if he wants to put himself in the category of all those other elite players that I'm sure he's trying to aim to reach. Now, without going into ridiculous depth about who the Bulls should take with the number 4 overall pick that they moved up to get, because that could probably be a whole video on itself, I'd suggest Denny Avdija is the player that they'd be looking to go for, and a player that would be ideal for them. He offers playmaking, he offers high IQ offensive ability, he just offers someone that's going to be steady from the get-go, someone that fills a position of need, and someone that can take the burden off Kobe White and Zach Lavine, who are still working out how to develop as playmakers and are still working out how to become the best versions of themselves offensively. So bringing in someone who has high-level experience at an international level, bringing in someone that's a multi-dimensional offensive player, and someone that's not a liability on defense, which is important when White and Lavine aren't going to be the best defensive backcourt. And I just think he's the perfect fit in terms of what he brings and the spot that they need to fill, which is clearly the small forward position when you you have Otto Porter Jr. who can't stay healthy, Thaddeus Young approaching 32 or is 32 currently. It just seems like the right option. That's the player I expect them to pick, and I think that's the player Bulls fans seem most interested in seeing. Going into next year, I think the Chicago Bulls should see drastic improvement. Billy Donovan might not be the best coach in the NBA, but if he's proven anything, it's competence, and the same can't be said for Jim Boylen. But the Bulls should see major improvement because of the upside they have on their roster. Markkanen can't be any worse than he was this year. There's just no way. Lavine continues to improve, and if he could become better defensively, he could become that all-star player that helps propel them forward. Kobe White's second half of the year was immense, and then you have a high draft pick, Wendell Carter Jr., and some other solid pieces. I think the Bulls are still a couple of years away from really competing, unless Kobe White really takes that leap that he looked like taking at the end of last year. Lowry returns to his best. They hit the draft out of the park, and Wendell Carter Jr. starts to flourish in the new system. If that doesn't all happen at once, they should expect to at least make a push at the playoffs and go from there. This team will still be incredibly young, but the Bulls finally have an above-average coach, and if everyone can stay healthy and continue to develop, they could be a force within the space of a few years. Not to mention Chicago finally have some competence at the general manager position, which should see them make the right decisions, or at the very least better decisions than they have made over the last few years. And that's already been shown by hiring Billy Donovan. As always, if you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Trying to make this type of content like 5 times a week, so subscribe to the channel for that. Like the video. Hope you enjoyed. Chicago fans should be more than excited going into next year because they finally have a direction, they have a new coach, and they have some promising young talent that I don't think people are realizing right now. So as always, thank you for watching. Catch you next time.